This is Captain Yossarian. He is bold, crazy, and caring. Yossarian is a bombardier fighting in the 256th Squadron of the 27th Air Force. He is the main character in Catch-22. He is significant because it's shown through his reluctance to obey his superiors that the war is absurd, and that the bureaucratic leaders are using the soldiers as though they are objects.
This is Chaplain Tapman. He is shy, kind, and eventually becomes quite assertive. Chaplain Tapman is the 256th Squadron's Anabaptist chaplain. He is significant because he changes the most through the course of the novel. He goes from a shy, compliant officer to a confident man who encourages Yossarian to desert the squadron in order to survive.
This is Milo Minderbinder. He is corrupt, greedy, and insane. Milo is a mess hall officer who runs M&M Enterprises. He is significant because he represents the greed and corruption that can occur in a capitalist society.
This is Snowden. He is brave, kind-hearted, and is currently 6 feet underground. Snowden is an officer in the 256th Squadron who died on a mission to Avignon. He is significant because his death caused Yossarian to realize how the leaders treat the war so lightly and how the soldiers are merely pawns in one big game.
Setting: Catch-22 is set in Pianosa, Italy during World War II.
The setting affects the characters greatly and causes psychological and moral changes. It also changed many of the characters' perspective on the war and their leaders.
Yossarian is in the hospital for a supposed liver disease in order to avoid the war.
He eventually leaves when a wounded Texan annoys him with his patriotism and friendliness.
He returns to Pianosa and refuses to fly any more missions to reach the required 50.
Yossarian is constantly reminded about the death of Snowden and the other men in his squadron. The others also seem to suffer from PTSD.
Milo Minderbinder, the mess hall officer, creates a huge one-man operated business in which he profits from the war.
Milo bombs his own squadron in the name of free enterprise and manages to get away with it.
Orr's plane crashes on a dangerous mission and he is presumed dead.
As the war progresses, the squadron's leaders become obsessed with publicity and status.
Yossarian's paranoia almost leads him to trying to kill Mick Watt.
Kid Sampson is accidentally sliced in half by a propeller, and Mick Watt commits suicide after he kills Kid Sampson.
Meanwhile, the missions are raised to 65. The Air Force itself, however, only requires 40.
After Nately's horror finally loves him, he is killed in combat.
Yossarian ends up at a hospital where he learns that Orr escaped to Sweden. The chaplain gains some courage, and Yossarian decides to escape to Rome.
The opening scene is significant as it reveals Yossarian's indifference toward military procedure and his reluctance to participate in the war.
The closing scene is significant because it shows how Yossarian would rather run away from the war, which would encourage his fellow soldiers to follow him, and defy the leaders of his squadron, than to be sent home and praise those who put numerous lives in danger.
Men, you're American officers. The officers of no other army in the world can make that statement. Think about it. Sergeant Knight informed Colonel Cargill that he was addressing the enlisted men. Colonel Cargill was so absorbed in the wartime propaganda to get to know the men who serve under him.
Did the dead man in my tent have a share? Yossarian demanded caustically. Of course he did, Milo answered. Everybody in the squadron has a share. He was killed even before he got into the squadron. This reveals how those in power treated death lightly and cared more about money rather than one's life.
There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. This shows how the soldiers were stuck in an infinite loop and were essentially slaves to the government they empower. Power leads to corruption, and those in power, those who never actually fight in the war, treat soldiers as objects.
The author's style is satirical. Joseph Heller uses satire to ridicule the war and its absurdity. An example of this: after the city fell, newspapers would appear throughout the world with American soldiers bludgeoning their way into the shattered city. Major DeCoverley was among them. The leaders were more concerned about publicity than actually destroying the enemy.